A Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions.
Hello, John Freedman here. Welcome once again to A Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions, our podcast of new Ukrainian texts. For those who might be joining us for the first time, let me give you a brief background of this project, which is presented by Ukrainska Pravda, the most popular internet portal in Ukraine. Over a series of 9 podcasts, we are offering readings and discussions of 9 works by 9 authors, all of whom are members of the Theatre of Playwrights in Kyiv, and all of whom contributed texts to an English-language anthology called A Dictionary of Emotions in a Time of War, 20 short works by Ukrainian playwrights. This award-winning collection was compiled and edited by yours truly and published in 2023 by the small but mighty Laertes Press in the U.S. Every text in the book was written in 2022 in response to the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. The text chosen for today's podcast is the Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier by Oksana Grytsenko. Oksana began her career as a journalist, working primarily for the Kyiv Post in Ukraine, while also contributing to Agence France Presse. She has written for such Western periodicals as The Guardian, Marie Claire, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and the Wall Street Journal. She began trying her hand at playwriting in 2019 in drama masterclasses headed by Maxim Kurochkin and Anastasia Kosodyi, both of whom she would join as a founding member of Theatre of Playwrights in Kyiv just a few years later. Her most recent full-length plays are I Will Return, which has been published in the Czech Republic, and Milkweed Man, which won first prize at the prestigious July Honey Play Competition in March 2024, and has already been staged at numerous theaters around Ukraine. Reading the Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier today is Wayne Maugans, an accomplished American actor who is equally at home on stage as he is on screen. In our discussion that follows the reading, Wayne and I share a good deal of information about his acting and directing career, so make sure you stay with us to hear some of those good stories. But I am compelled to say right now that not only did he debut alongside Brad Pitt in 1991 in the film Johnny Suede, he also spent 10 years working with the legendary avant-garde theater guru Joseph Chaikin, and he is the founder of Voyage Theater Company, an adventurous New York venue that specializes in non-American texts. In all, this is a wonderful pairing of Wayne Maugans presenting and discussing Oksana Grytsenko's hilarious and equally devastating The Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier.
A Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions.
The Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier by Oksana Grytsenko. It was around 5 a.m. that war broke out in a village at a crossroads where nothing ever happens. At first the dogs barked, then explosions were heard. They were firing somewhere from the direction of the headlands. Villagers ran from their houses, scratched their heads, and asked where they could find a bomb shelter. Someone said there was one at the school, but no one knew who had the keys to it. So everyone went back to their houses and decided to just sit on their butts. A few hours later, a column of Russian tanks roared down the main street, which was once named for Lenin. Naturally, there were heavy trucks, armored personnel carriers, oil tankers, and other such crap. The column ripped up the town's asphalt roads well into the evening, and over the next days, too. Some villagers jumped in their cars and headed north. They left no trace, while those who remained in the village, that is, almost everyone, decided to just sit on their butts and not stick their heads out. Especially since checkpoints had already been set up. The village was surrounded and occupied. Fighting broke out around midnight, but the villagers just huddled around their houses, because who would know where to run? And here there were neighbors all around. It's more fun in crowds. Then everybody broke up, and in the morning they went to work. Those who had work, anyway. Russian flags were already flying in the town center. The mayor was missing, and half the shops were closed. The villagers rushed to stock up on bread and flour and hid their expensive cars in gardens and barns just in case. Meanwhile, that night, 2 brave souls pulled down a Russian flag. The first thing to disappear in the village was bread, followed by medicines and pharmacies, and then Ukrainian national television. After that, the Russians. In this village, they were always informally called goats or butchers, stripped the mobile communication wires off the TV tower and planted landmines around it. The villagers felt as though they were stranded on an island, cut off from the world. They walked around their village with their mobile phones, turning them here and there, looking for those cherished lines of communication. The dashes did not appear on their screens. The mayor never showed up. There was milk, however, which farmers began distributing for free, because there was no way to leave the village to sell it. The cows were still producing milk, and you can't just throw milk away. Then the Armenians began baking bread. The Turks brought in vegetables, and other farmers brought in meat. The shops were completely empty, but the villagers always knew where to get what. As such, despite all the predictions, no humanitarian crisis had yet occurred. Next, the townspeople buried Ukrainian soldiers. 3 were found on the edge of the headlands, and several more in a molten tank where only bones were left, so no one ever found out how many died there. For the longest time, the goats from Muscovy would not allow burials, but finally the priests from the Moscow Patriarchate persuaded them to allow one. It was the only one to take place in the village. People carried coffins and flags down the main street, the one that used to be named after Lenin, the one along which the Russian goats had entered the village. They buried the bodies nearby. The armored soldiers were dumped in a common grave marked by a sign, "Unknown Defenders of Ukraine." The goats watched all this from their vehicles, moving slowly through the countryside. They did not walk on foot. They tried not to let the villagers see them. Meanwhile, Wi-Fi, then mobile communications, unexpectedly returned in the village. Russian channels ran on TV, but the villagers had long been using satellite dishes, so they watched whatever they wanted. Naturally, they got their news itself from the internet. And on the internet, people were writing that Ukrainian flags were flying in the surrounding towns and villages, that people were capturing goats in the bushes, were stealing their armored personnel carriers, and refusing to eat their humanitarian aid. The villagers scratched their heads and fell into thought. The next day, they took flags and placards and went looking for goats, shouting, "Glory to Ukraine!" Damn, everybody all around here is giving us the eye, the villagers thought. What the hell are the goats doing here anyway? It'll be harvest season soon. This is Ukraine, after all. And there was never any love lost for the goats here. At first, the villagers approached City Hall and knocked. But the occupiers were not there. Only the poor mayor appeared, stiff with fear. And he disappeared again. So the villagers headed for that same old former Lenin Street to look for goats. They found their tents and armored personnel carriers in the bushes on the village outskirts. There were several hundred villagers and about a dozen goats. Both sides were a little scared. But the villagers took the upper hand with their daring, their shouts, and their numbers. They shouted, "Putin's zero, Zelensky's our hero," and demanded that the goats leave. The villagers were not sure the goats understood, so sometimes they translated "do domu," go home in Ukrainian, into "domoy," go home in the language of the goats. The goats refused to come out of the bushes. So the activists climbed up on an armored personnel carrier. They jumped on it, shouted, and waved a flag trying to break it. But nothing would break. Eventually, two brave souls solemnly peed all over it. The goats would not move, and the villagers all went home. Because it was already evening and they had to feed their chickens and ducks, to say nothing of having to think about what to do next. Because this was already the 10th day of the occupation, and not a single person in the village was sure that they would live to see the morning.
A Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions.
Well, good morning, Wayne in New York. This is John in Greece. It's evening here. It's morning there. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank you, John. Nice to see you.
Listen, Wayne Maugans, actor who lives in New York and has done some really incredible stuff. One of the things that interests me most about what you have done is your creation of Voyage Theater, because you champion international work. I think that's absolutely wonderful. You've been doing that for a little over 10 years now, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. It was our 10th year anniversary in 2023 and 2024. So we've survived somehow, and we're going to keep plugging away at it. So
Wonderful.
I love working on international theater. You know, it's very exciting. It's very important. There aren't a lot of companies that are doing it, and it's become kind of the identity of our company at this point. So yeah.
Wonderful. Listen, you have worked on Broadway. You've worked on off-Broadway. You've done lots of film. You've done lots of television. I see you've worked with some real legends of American theater, Joseph Chaikin and Judith Malina. You have performed in plays by Tracy Letts, Sam Shepard, Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, and you made your film debut in Johnny Suede with Brad Pitt in 1991. That's pretty cool, Wayne. That's pretty cool. Before we get into talking about Oksana Grytsenko and her piece, the Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier, I want to hear a little bit about your work with Joseph Chaikin, because you worked with him a lot. And Chaikin was one of the mentors of Sam Shepard, and he's one of the great names in shall we call it avant-garde American theater, just for lack of a better word.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk about Joseph Chaikin just for a minute.
So I met Joseph Chaikin in 1991, and I met him while I was working at La Mama Experimental Theater Company, which is a big theater here in New York City. And I was working on a new play by Jean-Claude Van Italy, and Jean-Claude had been the principal writer of the Open Theater since its inception in the mid-1960s. He wrote the play America Hurrah, which was the Open Theater's big political hit that they had. He also wrote a whole bunch of work that the Open Theater did. Joe disbanded the Open Theater after about 10 years, and then reformed another theater company, and then also continued directing and acting. He's a wonderful actor, was a wonderful actor as well. And you're right, he was a mentor to some folks like Sam Shepard, who he met as a very young man. And Sam was very influenced by Joe. One of Joe's great heroes was Samuel Beckett. And Joe had done a production of Endgame that toured prisons in the United States, and then somehow ended up showing somewhere in Europe. I think it was in France. And Beckett came to see the production and absolutely loved it. And he wrote to Joe and told him how much he admired his production of Endgame. And then they started a correspondence that lasted a lifetime. So he had this lifelong correspondence, friendship, and obsession with all things Samuel Beckett. And he shared that with everybody that he encountered. His theater was so influenced by that. And you can see that in Sam Shepard's writing, too. I mean, Shepard's been, called the Beckettian cowboy. So Joe had a lot of influence on a lot of writers in those early days. Adrian Kennedy, Megan Terry, lots of folks. So I met Joe in 1991, and we started working together. He directing, and I was in several shows that he directed, and we started teaching together as well. And we taught master classes for actors and directors for almost 10 years. And so we got to be in this experimental space where we were working with students and also testing things out. It was kind of a laboratory for new plays as well as Beckett and Shakespeare. He was a very dear, close friend and mentor, and I cherish that time that I had with him. I was very lucky to have such a great mentor.
Listen, I'm thinking, can I make this leap? And actually, I think I can. To the piece that you read, Oksana Grytsenko's The Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier, because in my opinion, this piece is one of the strongest of the pieces, the short pieces in the book that I edited and published with Laertes Press in the U.S., A Dictionary of Emotions in a Time of War. And it reminds me of the humor of Nikolai Gogol. When I started translating it, it just this kind of sleepy Ukrainian town with these kind of doofuses that kind of roll out of bed with sleep in their eyes. And they kind of go out on the street and, oh my God, there's Russian tanks rolling down. What the hell? The mayor disappears. The mayor disappears, right? That's Gogol. The mayor disappears. Yeah. As these people are left on their own, and they're getting, they decide after a while, they heard somebody down the road were throwing sticks at the Russians, and damn, what are we going to do? And so they climb up on the tank, and two guys pee on it. Now, that is Ukrainian humor. Yeah. That's just pure Ukrainian humor. And I'm just, wondering, what your reactions were, not asking you to go too deeply into any process or anything, but you encountered this text. What were your reactions and what drew you to this text? And, just talk about your work with the text a little bit.
Yeah, I was so impressed with how compact the writing is here. There's no fat on the bone, as we would say. There's nothing extraneous here. Every sentence, every word conveys something that helps with the storytelling. And it is very funny. And it does have a kind of Beckett feeling for me. Maybe that's just because I'm such a fan of Beckett. I look for it everywhere. But, there's something about the absurdity of being in a situation that is hopeless and desolate, and yet finding a way to go on, finding a way to resist, finding a way to say, well, we don't know which way we go. Maybe tomorrow Godot will show up and we'll entertain ourselves in the meantime and play games. That's not quite what happens in this story, but some of the humor did remind me of that. I was interested in how the translation process might have been for you, the choice of some of the way that you translated it into English, like the phrase peed upon is very, I thought about that and I thought, well, there's a lot of ways that you could say that. Yeah. But the choice of saying peed upon seems somehow juvenile and funny and harmless and yet not.
Yeah, I think that is precisely why I decided to go with that. It's a phrase that's relatively normal in Ukrainian. It is not a common phrase in English. The way that works is not the way English usually works. I mean, it works. The structure of English allows it, but we don't usually say it that way. But I do believe that for the very reasons you said, the childish kind of quality of it, and the seemingly harmless quality of it, I mean, that completely inadequate quality of it. It's peed upon.
Yes.
It's this thing that's been peed upon. And there's a disdain in that, There's a real disdain.
Yes.
That thing has been peed upon. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Get that away from me. It's been peed upon. and yes,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to waste too much time talking about myself. I indeed want you to speak more, but I just will say that my choices as a translator are always choices. Everything that is there for, as a choice. And sometimes people don't understand that, and they think that that's a first choice. It's a knee-jerk choice. No. The knee-jerk choice happens in the first draft, and then the work starts.
Yeah.
And then you start pulling it apart. You start working with it. That is one where I realize I'm going, oh boy, that looks a little bit funny. And then the more I thought about it, I said, I think I want it to look funny. And so that's how it turned out. That's why it turned out that way. Yeah.
I think it was a wonderful choice, and I knew it was an intentional choice because, like you say, there are other ways that we might say that in English that are perhaps more vulgar, but the intention of that would convey something different. And I like the choice of Peed-Upon because it just feels so funny and innocent and petulant, and it's an act of defiance. Like, what dent could a little bit of urine make on a tank? And yet what a statement they make by doing that.
Right.
It's like they're claiming they're marking their territory, they're defacing this thing that is invaded their space. It's just brilliant.
And isn't it wonderful how she goes through, and the whole piece actually is funny. The entire piece is funny until you get to, I don't have it in front of me right now, but it may be the last line, it may be the last two lines, but, they go home and go to bed and, wonder, whether they have a future. It's like, boom. She just drops that one on you.
Yeah, that last line always snuck up on me. Every time I would get to it, I would feel a little chill run up the back of my spine, and it would sort of hit me in the stomach, and I'd be like, that's the truth, because they have now made this choice as a town, as a village. At first, the tanks rolled through, and another great choice I think you made in the translation was that they decided to all just sit on their butts. I don't know what that sounds like in Ukrainian, but in English, it just sounds so like passive and, again, kind of childish. And it's almost as if they didn't care, but it's not that they didn't care. They just didn't know what else to do.
Right.
Like when something this profound happens, and I've not ever lived in a war situation. I don't really have a first-hand experience upon which to draw, except for the events of 9/11. And I was in New York City for that. And I remember that feeling of just like, what are we going to do? Well, we're all going to sit in our living rooms and watch television. Because
you're going to sit on your butt.
What else?
Yeah.
We're going to sit on our butt. That's exactly what we're going to do, because who knows what else to do.
Right.
And then there's this part where they get together as a town. There's the first night that the fighting breaks out, they all huddle together in the town because it's more fun in groups. You're right that it's more fun in groups. And that's so true. It's so true. We do that. We go through these, whether it's a blackout or whether, it's a hurricane or whatever event happens, neighbors come together in ways that they haven't before and talk to each other. And there is a kind of fun to that. It's an obscene kind of fun, but maybe it's a survival mechanism as well.
Well, that's what all of these pieces in this book are about, how do we survive? How do each writer, that's what each writer is dealing with.
Right.
How do I survive? And usually it's not even so much physically, although as part of a war, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of deaths. Just today, I was looking on the internet, and several theaters lost actors who had gone to war and were killed this week. Another theater lost its administrator, who had been with the theater for like her whole professional life. She was killed along with, I believe, her child in a bombing raid in the city of Mykolaiv. And, it's all very, very real. But in a text, in literature, in drama, And these things in this book they're written by playwrights. They're written as dramatic monologues usually, but they're also prose. It's a wonderful kind of hybrid mix of drama, prose, monologue, whatever. And all of them are attempting to deal with survival in one way or another. Physical, yes.
Yeah.
But also culturally, because Vladimir Putin has declared that Ukraine does not exist as a culture. It does not exist. Ukrainian does not exist as a language. It's all just Russian. And so, they don't have a right to exist. And so, Oksana Grytsenko's piece right here, and when her characters get up on that tank and just pee on it, it's a monstrous statement. It's a hilarious statement. And it is a devastating statement because that's the best, we're just going to pee on you, sons of bitches.
Yeah. No, it's, the piece unfolds it's crafted so exquisitely. And then when I read Oksana Grytsenko's bio, and she had been a journalist, I guess, for a number of years.
Yeah.
A war journalist. There's a sense in the piece that it does have a little bit of reportage. It feels like we're getting an account of events, but a firsthand account from an eyewitness point of view. The fighting breaks out, the tanks roll in, the events that occur are listed, and then suddenly Russian flags appear, and then food shortages and all of this stuff. But the thing that makes it dramatic is the defiance that's underneath it all. The way that these people the people in the village come together, and collectively they find the ability to resist, and to resist this occupation in small ways. Even small ways are very, very important.
Right.
Two brave souls tear down the Russian flag.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
They snuck out in the middle of the night and they pulled down the Russian flag.
Yeah.
And that's where it begins. It begins there.
Yeah.
And people start to say, oh, we don't have to just roll over and take this. We can just make this as unpleasant for these Russians who never show their faces.
Right.
They stay in their tanks and stay at a safe distance away from the town in their own cowardly fashion. And the people in the town are then faced with these daily choices of how are we going to survive? How are we going to help each other provide food and the medicines that we need? How are we going to communicate with the outside world? And then how are we going to resist? And it's dramatically compelling stuff.
Wonderful. I really appreciate that. And I have a feeling that you and I could sit here and we could talk for another hour easily about this. But unfortunately, the gods of time say that we must wrap this up. I want to thank you so much. I appreciate you doing this. It's been great talking to you. I hope we have reasons to cross paths again in the future, Wayne.
Thank you again so much. It was an honor to be a part of such an important project. And my heart goes out to all the folks in Ukraine who are still in the midst of this crisis. And we're hoping for a positive outcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Wayne.
Thank you, John.
A Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions.
Thank you for joining us again for our Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions series of podcasts. In all, we are bringing you 9 texts written by founding members of the Theater of Playwrights in Kyiv. This was the 3rd, and all of the texts are published in English in the anthology titled A Dictionary of Emotions in a Time of War, 20 Short Works by Ukrainian Playwrights. I am a big fan of Oksana Grytsenko's The Peed-Upon Armoured Personnel Carrier, which you have just listened to, and I'm very happy that we, thanks to Wayne Maugans, could bring it to you. I think there is a line going directly back from it to the early works of the great Ukrainian writer Mykola Khokhol, a name that some of you may still only recognize when pronounced as Nikolai Gogol. Our next podcast features the American actor Joe Spano performing Call Things by Their Names, a subtle piece by Oksana Grytsenko that finds philosophy and national pride in the human habit of giving things names. Please join us for that. I am your host, John Freedman, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
A Dictionary of Ukrainian Emotions.